So get in the comments. Tell me, what's your favorite story told out of order? Like and subscribe if you like this content, and I will see you next week. Thank you for watching. So what's the point of telling a story out of order? Whether it's starting in the middle for a little in media res, jumping timelines to help build the mystery, or creating a prequel, there are lots of ways to escape the bounds of chronology in storytelling, some more effective than others. Today I want to take a look at some examples and see what makes for an effective nonlinear story and what makes for a mess. Let's start with the most common form of nonlinear storytelling, the flashback. The flashback serves a very important function in media, which is that in the real world, people tell stories about their past. But why show someone telling a story when you can instead show the story? Flashbacks usually serve as exposition. They show the audience something that they need to know and will inform the rest of the story. I find that most flashbacks are kind of horrible. Usually they serve to fill in information that could be picked up through context clues. By their very nature, flashbacks can't move the story forward. They can't change the status quo or create new consequences because we already know what happens next. In general, telling a story where the audience already knows what happens at the end is a bad idea. Not all flashbacks are made equal. The Sinner has some of the most impressive flashbacks I've seen in a TV show. The show is built around a compelling puzzle. Why would a boring housewife kill a stranger on the beach? The mystery is made all the more compelling by the fact that the housewife doesn't even know why she did it. So the whole show is a deep examination of her life as well as the fallout from her violence. The show hints at some horrible event in her past, but only with eerie imagery. When we finally see what happened, the mounting dread has reached such a roiling boil that every single moment of the flashback is dripping with tension. And, importantly, the flashback finally reveals the reason behind the murder. Memento is a great example of a story that keeps raising the tension but tells the whole story in reverse order.
Okay, so what am I doing? Oh, I'm chasing this guy. No, he's chasing me.
The character suffers from a memory condition, so the reverse order is meant to simulate that. But fundamentally, it's a story about a man solving a mystery, so the pieces of the mystery slot into place as we travel further back, and we learn about the events that started the story. Crucially, the film has rising action and mounting tension as we understand more and more what Leonard is heading towards. Interestingly, the plot is still extremely effective despite the fact that we've seen all the consequences before we see the choices that caused them. Another method is the character tracker. This is one of my favorite techniques. This is when you have a story that has a lot of different characters, each doing separate things. Instead of bouncing from character to character and keeping up with them chronologically, you instead tell one character's story in its entirety and then go back in time to catch up with the other characters. This technique was used masterfully in The Leftovers, choosing to focus on individual people instead of cutting together a dozen plots. The film Weapons also uses this method to keep the audience in the dark about the movie's core mystery, letting each character's story progress right up to the moment that a new secret is uncovered, and then jumping to another character.
Because earlier, back at Sealand...
So how do you effectively shuffle time in a story? First, you need to maintain rising action. The stakes need to get higher, new information needs to be learned. You have to proceed through the plot as if it were in order. The next thing you need to do is tell your story in little vignettes. It's much easier to follow a nonlinear story if each little chunk of time is its own narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. The last thing is to solve mysteries. If you give the audience a conundrum, something they need to figure out, then you can frame your story around the development of finding new information instead of the development of progressing through a plot in order. A prequel may not seem like a nonlinear story, but it kind of is. If you think about it, the prequel satisfies all the rules of a nonlinear story. Oh, what are the rules? Let's do a flashback to earlier when I told you what they were.
To find out, we go earlier.
Hi, my name is Tim, I write for television, and I have become unstuck in time. Today, I want to talk about non-linear storytelling. Before we get started, I want to define what I mean by non-linear storytelling. What I mean is that scenes in the story are presented out of order for the audience, but not for the characters. There's no time travel. The characters are living a normal, in-order life. It's only the audience that are bouncing around.
And I don't even know when this next part happened.
As we can see, a prequel is a kind of nonlinear story. It's an event that happened earlier, but you, the audience, are watching it after. Now you may be saying, hang on, just because the movies were made out of order doesn't mean you need to watch them out of order. And you're right, and you're very clever for making that comment. And a lot of directors have insisted that you can watch their movies out of order, and they are lying. Because almost every single prequel falls into foreshadowing quicksand. Here, let me explain. One of my biggest complaints about the show Andor is, hang on, put the pitchfork down. I like the show, I just have some notes. My biggest complaint is that it sacrifices its own story to foreshadow a different story. In episode 9 of season 2, Andor and Bix have a climactic moment in their relationship. I'm not going to spoil it, but I'll say that they have been building the relationship up to this moment for the whole show. It happens at the end of the episode, and it provides the perfect button to the story. A devastating personal note at the conclusion of all the action. But then the episode doesn't end. There's a whole other scene where Andor and a bunch of rebels wake up a robot. This is foreshadowing quicksand. Because the robot is a main character in Rogue One, and the audience knows that Andor and this robot are going to have a very cool friendship. So if you're watching the show after Rogue One, you can point at the screen and say, hey, that's Alan Tudyk. But just looking at the story in isolation, this is a terrible way to end this episode. It totally lets the air out of the story. Instead of ending on an emotional beat that has been episodes in the making, we end on Andor looking at a robot that he doesn't know. The writers sacrifice their story just a little bit at the altar of foreshadowing, jeopardizing a little bit of its own story to connect to another. And Andor isn't alone. The only exceptions that I could find were Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Octopus. Stalking octopus. Wish we had one. It's awesome. Earlier.
Another common form of nonlinear storytelling is the flash forward. I see this most often used in the form of the interrogation setup, starting the story with a character telling you what happened to him. You could make the argument that this turns the whole narrative into a flashback, but the true function of the interrogation setup is to give the audience a tantalizing look at how the story ends, just enough to get them intrigued, and then start from the beginning. An important component to any nonlinear story is justification. If you're going to be jumping around in time, you have to present a very good reason for why you're telling the story that way. If your hero is suffering from some condition that makes him experience life out of order, that's a good justification for nonlinear storytelling. If you're trying to tell a story about the interconnected lives of a half dozen strangers, then nonlinear storytelling makes sense. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, on the other hand, fails to really justify its nonlinearity. It has some of the most bizarre flash forwards I've ever seen. Random clips are shown from moments later in the movie, and there's hardly any justification for why they are shown. The end result is that the movie spoils most of its big set pieces.
And from the end to the beginning of this tragic tale, so now back to the end. In progress.
So why do this? Why tell a story out of order? I think at the end of the day, it's because every story is a conversation between the storyteller and the audience. Some storytellers just want a monologue. They want the stage to themselves and they want the audience to stay quiet. But other storytellers want you to lean forward. They want you to ask questions. They want you to investigate. I think that investigating media helps us grow closer to the stories that we love. And I think the best storytellers are ones that ask more of their audience than to just sit back and absorb. I mean, that's why I make these silly videos.